you ever stopped to think about how people in the Middle Ages actually fought with swords? I'm not talking about the flashy spinning and dramatic moves you see in Hollywood movies. I mean the real fighting techniques that knights depended on when their lives were on the line and they needed to avoid getting run through in battle. Maybe you've pictured yourself gripping a sword, charging straight into danger, and taking on a terrifying monster like one of King Arthur's legendary heroes. It sounds exciting, but the truth is that real swordsmanship was much more complicated than just aiming the sharp end at your opponent. There was a lot more skill involved than most people realize. On top of that, medieval warriors didn't rely on just one type of sword. They had a whole collection of different blades, along with specialized stances, clever techniques, and smart battlefield tactics. Many of those methods were far more advanced than the way they're usually shown in movies. So today, I'm taking a trip back to the Middle Ages to explore what sword fighting was really like. Along the way, I'll be looking at footwork, fencing techniques, thrown weapons, and plenty of other fascinating combat skills. Welcome to Medieval Madness. Back in the Middle Ages, knights were some of the biggest celebrities around. The most successful among them earned far more than just respect. They were rewarded with wealth, large pieces of land, impressive castles, and powerful positions at court. People looked up to them as the action heroes of their time, and their adventures filled legends, poems, and paintings that celebrated daring battles, flashing swords, and honorable quests. But becoming a respected knight took much more than owning a strong horse or wearing a polished suit of armor. Mastering the sword was one of the hardest parts, and it demanded years of dedication and constant practice. Young boys who dreamed of becoming knights usually started training in childhood, spending years developing the skills they would need on the battlefield. During that training, they learned how to move quickly and confidently, how to position their feet for balance, how to block or redirect incoming attacks, and, most importantly, how to finish a fight as efficiently as possible. Medieval sword fighting wasn't just wild swinging or randomly stabbing at an enemy. It combined athletic ability, precision, timing, and carefully practiced movements, making it a highly refined martial art. The greatest experts of the era were known as fight masters. These highly skilled instructors devoted their lives to studying combat and teaching their students the finer details of fighting at close range. Many of these masters became nearly as famous as the knights they trained, and they earned that reputation through years of experience and deep knowledge. Their techniques didn't appear overnight. They were built on traditions that had been handed down for generations, with each new generation refining and improving what came before. These fight masters weren't simply instructors. They carried an incredible amount of knowledge with them, almost like living encyclopedias of swordsmanship. Their reputations spread far and wide, and ambitious knights traveled great distances to learn from the very best. In many ways, it was similar to how today's professional athletes seek out elite coaches, although back then there was a lot more chainmail involved and definitely a lot fewer sponsorship deals. A lot of these combat experts came from the Italian tradition of swordsmanship. One of the most well-known among them was Fiore dei Liberi, who lived in the mid-14th century. He worked as a knight, a diplomat, and also as a traveling fencing master. Fiore, who was Italian-born, trained under Johannes of Swabia in Germany, which helped shape his broad understanding of different fighting styles. By 1383, he had already built a strong enough reputation as a martial arts expert that he was assigned to inspect things like crossbows and siege engines for his province. That's the kind of responsibility you only give to someone who absolutely understands how weapons are supposed to work in practice. Over the years, Fiore wrote about encountering what he called false masters, people who claimed to be skilled fighters but, in his view, didn't even meet the basic level of ability expected from a student. Some of these men reportedly became so offended when he refused to teach them that he was forced to defend his honor in 5 separate duels. These duels were fought with sharp longswords, and the protection was minimal. Fighters only wore a padded gambeson, similar to a thick quilted jacket, along with a pair of reinforced leather gloves called chamois-style gauntlets. Despite the danger, Fiore claimed he won every single one of those encounters without even a scratch. If that account is accurate, it certainly explains why he felt no urgency to share his knowledge with competitors until later in life. Instead, he kept his techniques closely guarded, passing them on carefully to his own students. After all, if a master revealed every detail of his methods to everyone, then those same techniques could easily be used against him, which would defeat the entire purpose of being a master in the first place. Fiore eventually compiled his teachings into a treatise called Fior di Battaglia, or The Flower of Battles, sometime before 1409, when he stated he already had around 50 years of experience behind him. It remains one of the oldest surviving instructional manuals on chivalric martial arts. The work lays out in remarkable detail how a medieval fighter was expected to handle nearly any situation, whether on foot or mounted, armored or unarmored, and using weapons like swords, daggers, spears, or anything else that could be picked up in a fight. What makes the manuscript especially striking is that it isn't just text. It's filled with rich illustrations that don't just describe techniques, but visually demonstrate them, often in dramatic medieval style. In many ways, Fiore wasn't simply writing a manual. He was creating what we might think of today as a fully illustrated training guide for real combat. Weapon masters in the Middle Ages trained with a wide range of different tools of combat, and each weapon came with its own strengths, weaknesses, and specific uses. Even so, they all shared one simple truth: they were deadly in the right hands. Among the most common weapons were swords of several types. The two-handed longsword stood out for its balance, allowing fighters to deliver both powerful cuts and precise thrusts. The one-handed arming sword was built for speed, designed to let a fighter strike quickly and efficiently. Then there was the rapier, a thin blade typically used with one hand, extremely sharp and focused almost entirely on thrusting attacks. And finally, there was the falchion, also one-handed but with a curved blade that blended the cutting power of a sword with something closer to an axe's heavy impact. These one-handed weapons were often paired with a buckler in a fighting style known as sword and buckler. In this setup, the sword was held in one hand while a small shield was carried in the other. The buckler wasn't large enough to stop arrows or fully block major attacks, but it was incredibly useful in close combat. Fighters used it to disrupt an opponent's movement, deflect incoming strikes from hand weapons, or even strike them directly in the face when the opportunity came up. But training didn't end with sword techniques. Students were expected to be prepared for just about anything the medieval world might throw at them. That meant learning how to fight with daggers, poleaxes, and full-sized shields, as well as how to defend themselves when completely unarmed. In some cases, they were even taught how to use whatever was nearby as an improvised weapon, like a wooden plank or a heavy stone. A major part of their training focused on mastering basic stances and guards, which formed the foundation of both offense and defense. One of these was the high guard, where the sword is held above the head or shoulder, ready to deliver a powerful downward strike. This position gives the fighter strong leverage, increased striking power, and a clear view of the opponent's movements. The middle guard is more balanced, with the sword held around shoulder height and pointed toward the opponent. This is the most flexible stance, allowing the fighter to move quickly between offense and defense. From here, you can launch rapid attacks, shift into other positions smoothly, or respond to incoming strikes with minimal delay. It's essentially the all-purpose stance for staying ready in combat. The low guard takes a more defensive approach, with the blade angled downward in front of the body. This position is especially useful for stopping low attacks aimed at the legs, while also setting up opportunities for upward or rising strikes in return. Beyond stances, there were also clearly named strikes used in combat. The Oberhau, or overhead strike, delivered a fast and forceful blow downward, usually aimed at the head or upper body. The Unterhau, or rising strike, came upward from below, targeting the lower body or hands. The Zornhau was a horizontal strike aimed at the opponent's head or upper body, often used both to attack and to create openings in their defense. And of course, there was the thrust, direct, fast, and precise, aimed straight at the opponent's face or torso, especially effective when using weapons like the rapier or arming sword. A lot of other combat manuals were written as well, and many of them included detailed illustrations alongside explanations of different fighting techniques. These kinds of training books weren't cheap at all. In fact, they were often commissioned by wealthy patrons who supported the instructors, and some of these manuscripts took years to finish, sometimes requiring multiple authors working together at the same time. You can think of them almost like luxury handcrafted martial arts textbooks. The difference is that instead of clean, modern printing, they were filled with carefully hand-drawn ink illustrations, and every now and then you'd even get a monk in the margins quietly complaining about the work he was stuck doing. One of the most famous German fencing masters, Hans Talhofer, produced at least 5 different manuals during the 15th century. He earned his living by teaching and preparing people for trial by combat, which was essentially a legally sanctioned duel to settle serious disputes. His 1467 manuscript is especially notorious for its graphic content. What often starts as a hint, almost choreographed sequence of movements quickly escalates into something far more brutal. Instead of ending with respectful bows or clean finishes, many sequences conclude with swords driven into eyes, violent impalements, or blunt instructions for beating an opponent to death. Some of the techniques even had names that sound almost like something out of a fighting video game, with dramatic labels like Crumpler, Sculler, Wrathful, and Four Openings, giving them an almost intimidating personality of their own. Even though many of these manuals have been lost over the centuries, a surprising number still survive today. From the German-speaking regions alone, around 80 known copies have made it through time, war, and general historical chaos. Still, there's a major challenge for anyone trying to actually learn how medieval sword fighting worked from these books. A lot of the techniques are described in ways that are long-winded, confusing, or just plain difficult to interpret. Despite the number of surviving manuscripts, they often don't make things much clearer. In many cases, the instructions feel like half-finished riddles, and the illustrations don't always help either. Some drawings are so unclear that they appear to show impossible body positions, with fighters sometimes depicted as if they have extra arms or awkward, unnatural limbs just to illustrate movement. Other descriptions are frustratingly vague, explaining actions that are hard to visualize or don't fully make sense on their own. To make things even more unusual, many of the texts were written in verse rather than straightforward prose. On top of that, some masters may have intentionally made their teachings harder to interpret, possibly to keep their methods restricted to only their most trusted students. There were also so-called secret techniques passed down by certain fight masters. One of them was a German master named Johannes Lichtenauer, who lived in the 14th century. He was known for traveling widely, learning from different regions, and teaching as well. He comes across almost like a mix of scholar, wandering instructor, and collector of martial knowledge. Someone who clearly had a huge influence, even if the historical details about his life are still partly wrapped in legend. Lichtenauer is believed to have written his teachings in deliberately cryptic verse. In fact, some modern experts have described his writing as almost like nonsense or coded language. According to one of his students, who later became a master himself, Lichtenauer used special secret words so that only his trained followers could properly understand his system. Even when researchers are able to interpret these manuals, many believe important details are still missing or intentionally left out. This makes it difficult to fully reconstruct what the original techniques were meant to look like in practice. A similar approach appears in the work of 15th century Italian fencing master Filippo Vadi, who also wrote his manual in poetic form. In his case, it's fairly clear that some of the wording was chosen more for rhythm and rhyme than for technical clarity, which sometimes makes the instructions harder to interpret in a practical way. Some manuals even include advice that feels completely strange from a modern perspective. For example, in the German tradition known as gladiatoria, a series of 15th century manuscripts. One instruction suggests removing the pommel, the rounded end of the sword handle, and throwing it at an opponent as a last resort. It reads almost like a desperate, if everything else fails, kind of tactic. When a technique appears in only a single manuscript, it becomes extremely difficult to know what to make of it. It might have been a common but poorly recorded method, something very rare, or something so situational that it almost never came up in real combat. In some cases, it could even have been misunderstood or included as a joke or teaching experiment. In the end, a lot of this remains uncertain. There are still many unanswered questions, especially when it comes to the more unusual techniques described in these sources. Historians and modern practitioners continue to debate whether these strange moves were actually practical battlefield methods, experimental training ideas, or simply a way for medieval fighters to show off their skill and creativity. One cautionary story comes from a monk at St. Edmund's Abbey in Suffolk, who wrote in the mid-12th century about an incident involving a man he had encountered while visiting another abbey in Reading. The man in question had not always lived a quiet religious life. His earlier career looked very different. Born in 1157, Henry of Essex came from a noble and wealthy family. He was a knight with a strong reputation for swordsmanship and military skill. But despite his abilities, he was also known for having a dark side. According to accounts, he was involved in theft, the humiliation of women, and even the torture of an innocent man at one point. Things took a dramatic turn during a battle in Wales when Henry falsely declared that the king had been killed. That mistake almost caused the entire army to break formation and flee, creating chaos on the battlefield. It was a serious error that would come back to haunt him. 6 years later, one of Henry's own relatives formally accused him of treason, based on that moment of panic and disruption. The only way to settle the matter, according to the laws of the time, was through a judicial duel, essentially a trial by combat where honor, reputation, and future survival were all on the line. When the day came, crowds gathered along the riverbanks to watch the two knights face off. At first, Henry fought well, as you might expect from an experienced warrior. But then, according to the monk's account, something changed. He began to experience disturbing visions of the people he had wronged in the past. Overcome with fear and guilt, he abandoned his training and rushed forward in desperation, losing the careful control that had once made him dangerous. In the confusion that followed, Henry fell in battle. By order of the king, his body was taken away for burial by local monks. But in an unexpected twist, he was not actually dead. He survived and was later nursed back to health by the monks who cared for him. After that, Henry spent the rest of his life living among them in repentance. It was there, many years later, that he met the monk who recorded his story. The chronicler presented the tale as a moral lesson about pride, guilt, and divine judgment. But there's another way to look at it. In the moment that mattered most, Henry of Essex abandoned everything he had learned about swordsmanship. And that decision ultimately cost him everything. And that brings this chapter of medieval madness to a close. Thanks for following along, and I'll see you next time.